we're integrating separately the advection part, the refraction part, and then the source terms. And actually, this difference in source term integration was that the origin of the split between WaveWorks and WAM. So all the people that started pretty much this what Klaus Hartmann produced as third generation models. The idea that you need to have some actual physical computation of the nonlinear interactions. So all this was done after a group of comparison of different models that is called the SWAMP group. They had a book that was published in 1984. And then after that, Klaus Hartmann called up all his friends and told them, well, if you want to start developing a wave model, we have a meeting tomorrow in Hamburg. And so everybody flew from Italy, from France, from everywhere to go to Hamburg and start what they call the WAM group, so it was a wave model development group, and which resulted in the production of what we know as a WAM model. So there was a final report, now a book edited by Common, Gerben Common, and others, published in '94, and it was essentially the basis for the WAM model. In that group, there's actually there was a lot of focus on the parameterizations, maybe not so much on the numerics. And so when some young guys at that time thought that the numerics were a bit lousy and they could do something better, well, they had some hard time getting people to move, and so Hendrik was one of them. So he was doing his PhD at that time. I said, okay, well, if they don't want to accept what I want to put, I'll just start my own model. And so a lot of that was actually, there was a bit of a fight at that time about what's now called the limiter, and I will explain to you what this limiter is. And the basic idea of the limiter is that when you're integrating some equation and it's changing very fast, and you want to make it stable or just don't want the thing to blow up, and well, sometimes you have to find some shortcuts. And one shortcut was to introduce a limiter. Essentially, your numerics are not able to have something which changes too fast. So, okay, well, we're not going to change this that fast. We'll just limit the change of the spectrum either for the refraction term or for the source terms. And for a very long time, until 2000 something, the limiter that we used in WAM was actually not very good at all. It was actually very bad for short fetch, and that's one of the reasons why second generation models, especially at Météo France, were operational until very recently. Because especially in the Mediterranean, WAM was really doing a very bad job, not because of the parameterization, but because of the numerics. All right, so I'll go over all that. So there's yeah, as I told you yesterday, there are 4 time steps for. So he's talking about per grid because he's thinking about the more multi-grid system in which you have several grids interacting. And so actually, this is the way we also run our systems. We have this global grid and the regional zooms. We have different time steps for the different grids. But for each grid, you have 4 basic time steps. So one is this overall time step for integrating the full equations. And this is actually the time step for which we split the different terms. So each term is integrated for this global time step. And there's a rendezvous at the end of this global time step that will bring everything together, and the energy is exchanged from different components and spatially. Within this overall time step, the global time step within the input file is the first one. Then you have the time step for spatial propagation, and it's actually most important for the lowest frequencies because they travel faster. So this is why Hendrik was emphasizing here the time step for the lowest mode frequency. And of course, if you have currents, the currents will also move the energy around, and so you may have to reduce a bit the time step when you put currents. And typically, what we found when we were running the global model with current from Mercator or HiCom, we had to reduce the half an hour time step to something more like 20 minutes, something like that. That's for a half-degree grid. Then the third time step is a refraction time step. And I was telling you yesterday, and it will be explained after that, there's a limiter acting on this. And then there is a minimum time step for the source term integration. Essentially, the source terms are integrated over this one global time step. But if the spectrum is changing too fast, the time step is adapted to refine that, but there is a limit. so that it doesn't take too long. And so that limit is its minimum time step. And well, this is essentially the big difference between WAM and WaveWatch, is this treatment of the source integration. And so these 4 time steps are given in that order in the input file, the grid.inp. And yeah, so here we'll discuss first the TFL condition, and so that's the second time step, the propagation one. And what's written here, it's the most important, and it's true. It's mostly true for deep water application where you don't have any refraction, and you have to bear in mind that these people that were developing the WAM model, they were actually coming from the global ocean. They were putting a constant depth, they didn't care about the bottom depth. And then they started adapting the WAM model for shallow water, but that, that was their mindset was more to have something that works in deep water. And so, of course, in shallow water, the third one actually also becomes fairly important too. So the TFL time step is so that's important for the explicit schemes, which are the ones used on regular grids here in WaveWatch. And the basic idea is that the information in your numerical integration cannot skip one spatial step over one time step. So that's the natural limit you have, is that if you want to move information with energy in the grid spatially, you cannot jump over many spatial steps. You have to do them one by one. So if your time step is too big, then the energy will try to jump too far, and then actually the scheme for use here unstable. So either the first order upwind scheme, or even the what we actually use mostly, which is the third order upwind quickest scheme. And if you do exceed this time step, you'll start to see some wiggles on the grid spacing. And if you're doing a global run or a regional run, that will first happen at the highest latitudes, because if you have a regular grid, longitude, latitude, your meridians go together, and so close to the north or close to the south, you will see that your spacing is smaller, and so this is where the TFL conditions exceeded faster. So this is also one reason for limiting the extent of the wave models to go not too far north if you use a regular grid, is because your spacing becomes so small that it will require a time step smaller, and because the time step is for the entire grid, it's a bit silly to have all this region covered by just one grid. So the other approach is to have different bands for different latitudes. So that's what they do at NSEP. You have one band which goes all the way to 80 north, and which has a smaller time step, and then south of 60 north, they have a different time step. So, and you can have these two models way nested with a multi-grid. And so in the code, the CFL time step, so the time is actually adjusted separately for each frequency. And the long ones is for the higher frequencies. And there is some adjustment for the current velocity. And so what we have actually, I should actually check that. So the overall time step is this first number, the big rendezvous time step, can be fairly large, and that's the benefit in WaveWatch. You can have this time step much bigger than the source term time step, which allows you to save computer time on the propagation, because many, if you're doing a regional scale or global model application, you could have a resolution of at least maybe 20 kilometers or quarters than that, and that will only require for the propagation the time step that maybe 10 minutes, 20 minutes, something like that. But the time step for the source terms, you have wind blowing very strongly, and the wind sea starts to grow, then you actually need a time step much shorter than that. And actually, we saw yesterday that the source term, the typical evolution for very young waves is less than an hour. So you need to resolve that dynamic, so you need a small time step for the source terms. If you have the same time step for the source term and for the propagation, which is done in WAM, then it's either you have some inaccuracies in your source term integration, or you're losing efficiency by having a too small time step. So that was the basic idea for doing that in WaveWatch, and this is why Hendrik created his own code, basically. And then And then there is an issue with the splitting of the equation. So of course, the fact that we integrate the equation separately with different terms and not everything with the same time step, that introduces an error. So it's not exactly the same. And so if you make the ratio of the propagation time step and the global time step to become very large, then this splitting error becomes larger, and then you will go away from what should be the true solution. So what Henrik is advising here is a factor of maybe 2 or 3 times between the advection time step and the sorption time step. Personally, I've actually been using, I think, something more like 5 or 6, but you know, you have to test it and see what the impact is on the solution, and make your own judgment on that. There's no hard rule for choosing these ratios. And then, yep, ratio overall CFL time step overlap. Yep. Yeah, so there's some issue then. If you actually have some overlapping grid of the same crank, like what you're doing at n step, so that is global grid and they have a band at higher latitudes with small time step. You have to be careful with these things, not to have this ratio of the global time step with CFL time step too big. Essentially, what's happening is that you're going to have some mismatch between the grid and the boundary if you don't do it right. Then the refraction time step. So refraction in the model is actually everything which makes the waves turn. So we have a directional spectrum, okay? And so essentially what we're doing, we're taking energy from one direction and shifting it to another direction. And this is done with an advection time step in this direction space. And this, physically, there are 3 effects that cause this. Even in deep water without any currents, what's happening is that because we're working on a spherical Earth, and the wave is actually going straight on the Earth, which is in a great circle, there is this change of direction relative to the north along the great circle. So as you know, if you look at the trajectory like a plane or a boat going straight, then it's going to hit at some point the maximum latitude, and at that point the direction is either going east or west, and then it's you know, you're going back, and then so you have a shift in the direction. So there is that term which is part of the refraction term. It's not physically refraction, but it's treated like the refraction. Then there is refraction due to changes in depth and changes in currents. And what used to be done in version 3, so that's, I have to update it slide. So that was done in version 3.14, is that the in order to make the integration stable with its time step, there is a limiter. So if in reality waves should turn faster than what the CFL allows, then this turning is limited. And so it's actually, you're solving something different from the real equations. So instead of returning a lot, then the waves are just turning a bit. It used to be only done on the depth, and we had really strong problems with currents in shallow water. So now the limiter is done on the full refraction term, which includes the great circle, depth, and currents. And it's done separately for each frequency. So of course, if some parts of the spectrum are turning very fast, and some are turning slower, then they will be limited each in their proper way. So ideally, yes. I think we coded up an output for the TFL, or the maximum TFL. I have used it sometimes for the advection, spatial advection. I think it's coded up also for the spectral refraction. I don't think I've ever looked at it. So if you want to check that it's correct, you can check it. I don't know. Otherwise, the way to do it is essentially you run the model twice with different time steps, and you see if there's a difference. And ideally, you may want to make this time step small, but there's a the compromise between speed and the accuracy of the solution. And what Henrik was saying here, that it may be useful to reduce the refraction time step to double check, if you have any filter and limiter kicking in. But at n step, they usually keep it very large, typically half of the overall time step. And actually, in the way the equation is integrated, it's done actually in 2 parts because it makes it more accurate. First, it does the half of the refraction, then the full propagation in space, and then half of the refraction again. So it doesn't give any benefit to set it to the full time step because it's going to be split in two anyway. And so typically you can do it half, and I tend to make it even smaller than that. And we expect that even for very long period infogravity waves, that we had some solution corresponding to a theory, and then yeah, it's a bit better if you make it a bit smaller than half. But that depends on the problem you're looking at. So the basic idea is that you have to think about it. So what makes you think? That sometimes is a problem, but it's always good to start. And then this source from business I was telling you about at the beginning. Source from integration. So in the if you look at the 1988 WAM paper in APO from the WAM-D group, it essentially explain this limiter business to some extent. It's a bit hidden, so you have to know about it. And so they use an integration scheme in time that had some issues, and so that needed some limiter, and all the schemes have some issues. So it's very hard to integrate that source from evolution with a time step that's not too small, because the short waves have an evolution time which is very fast, and the long waves have an evolution time which is slower. So you have this multi-scale problem in your wave spectrum, which is not so easy to solve. And this choice of the limiter and how it's implemented can have a very big impact on the solution, on the wave heights and peak periods. I will show that just after. One issue that Hendrik had with the WAM group is that it actually chose a limiter which doesn't converge. There's a couple slides about that. And that may be okay for engineering applications, but if you want to do research on the energy balance in the wave spectrum, that was not so good. And yeah, all the models have some kind of limiter, and it's one also, and I'm sure, I haven't checked, but I'm sure Tomowak has some limiter also on the source integration. So what was done in WaveWatch 2, which was a different world, is that the limiter was dynamically adjusted to time step. And typically, if you use smaller time steps, as I will show just after, you will have a smoother model results. And the fact that it's smoother, it actually will integrate faster. So you may think that if I make my time step smaller, I'm going to lose time, but you may actually gain time by making the time step smaller, because you get a smoother spectrum. And so instead of getting wiggles, instead of getting crazy, then the stuff will be smooth and will actually converge faster, integrate faster. And what Hendrik uses typically says here is between 5 and 60 seconds. And I guess that's okay if you're looking at some waves, probably up to 1 hertz. If you had to go to higher frequencies, you may want to go to shorter time steps. And what we do in our global model with a maximum frequency of 0.7 hertz, we typically use like 10 seconds. But between 1 and 10 seconds doesn't make a big difference. But of course, this is much smaller than, for example, at ECMWF with the WAM model, they integrate everything with the same time step, which is typically 10 minutes, I think. And which means that they integrate their source frames with 600 seconds. And you will see that the results can be a bit different. And all that limiter business is described in 2 papers. One was Solomon 92 in JPO, and this one, which actually had a very hard time to get published because the WAM guys just didn't want it to be published. And that's Solomon 2002 in the Global Atmosphere and Ocean System journal. And so that's what, yesterday we had the impact of the source terms, and here is the impact of bad numerics if it gets really bad. And so this is an example of taking, I think, a 20 meter per second wind over a uniform ocean. So you take just one point in the wave model, you suppose it's uniform, so no propagation, you integrate in time. The red line here is the result with a time step of 20 minutes. And this is basically what was used for large scale application in WAM. And you see it grows slowly and then it catches up. The solution with a very small time step is a dashed green line. Okay, so it's very different. See, look, after 6 hours, instead of having 1.5 meters, you have 5 meters. And this is basically the story of the difference between VAG at Météo France, which was the top curve, and WAM at the bottom, and that's the reason why Jean-Michel Lefebvre didn't want to change to WAM until very recently because of the limiter issue in WAM. And if you make the time step somewhere in between, then it catches up, and you typically have to go to something fairly small. Well, like 2 minutes instead of 20 minutes. So you may want to check for this kind of stuff in the model you're using. You actually get something which is the same solution if you reduce the time step. Okay, so there's some other ways to do the limiter compared to what was done in WAM. And so this is what Henrik called the asymmetric conversion limiter. It's actually integrated with a big time step. And instead of getting the that's again with 20 minutes, and instead of getting the red curve, you can get something which actually overshoots here. And so this is not very nice, but the initial growth is a bit faster, and so that was tested by Henrik. It might be useful for some models. And the limiter that's for the HS, and this is now for the peak period. And so you see, instead of getting this spectrum in green, you get the spectrum here in blue, right? Okay, and so what's actually done in so the idea is in WaveWatch is that instead of having to work with this limiter, and there's actually limiter acting, but it's actually better just to have the right time steps. So it just makes a small time step as small as needed. And so here in that case, here in that case you see that 2 minutes was more or less okay for the 20 meter per second wind, and maybe 1 minute or less than 1 minute is probably better. So actually, we typically use 10 seconds, and that converges to what the solution should be. That's the time integration. Okay. All right. So now a few things about which is more or less related is instead of using just one grid, it may be better to use several grids, and so that was the idea of Henrik, like having a mosaic of grids interacting together. And that's, the benefit of that is that it will allows you to have the time step different for each grid. So if you have a very fine grid close to the coast, and then coarser grid at regional scale, then you can have the time step done separately for each grid. So you don't have to get the same time step for the coarse and fine grids. And so what we'll show just after that is a triple nest for slow propagation, another one for hurricanes. Of course, what you have to do is to then get some rendezvous also of the grids so that they actually exchange some energy at some point. But you don't have to have the same time step for each grid. So this is one example. I think that's just a wind field here in this area. So the domain here is cut out, so you only have computation over the white area here. And there was an there was an animation as well. Okay, right. So the basic idea is what's happening with the different grids. So you have the time axis here, and you have the 3 grids. And so you have some boundary grid which is inside, which is overlapping the grids. There's some outer grid outside, and there's some inner grid inside. And typically this might be with finer resolution. And so this will be the global time step for this inner grid is half of the global time step for the outer grid. So what's happening is that the inner grid is forced by the boundary condition coming from the outer grid. And then at the end of the integration of the global time step of the outer grid, then the fine resolution inner grid is it's taken to the outer grid, and and then you compute for each cell of the outer grid the average of the spectrum from the smaller scale inner grid. And so this is, so you do 2 global time steps for the inner grid, and then you feed back the energy for the outer grid. Then you will march again 1 outer grid, and then it will feed the inner grid and so forth. And you can do that with as many ranks as you want, so with very fine and then very coarse grids. And so what's happening here from going to the fine to the coarse, just some averaging operator. So that was easy for a regular grids. It was a bit more of a nightmare for curvilinear grids and triangular grids, but it also worked. So we have to have some systems with triangles nested into rectangles and curvilinear grids nested into regular grids. I haven't checked that we can actually nest the triangles into a curvilinear grid. I think it worked, but I'm not sure. All right. Okay. Yeah, of course. And yeah, all that because I don't have all the animation. But this is basically the story about doing the multi-grid. And this is one example in which here you have 3 grids, and there's like one white line here. Yeah, we hardly see it. So there's actually 3 different grids in a hurricane, which are nested into a bigger grid, and you actually don't see the boundary effects. It's actually well done. The only thing you see which is funny here is these wiggles here, which are the Gaussian sprinkler effect. We have more energy going into the digitalization direction. All right, so that's all I had about this numerical integration for the regular grid. And after that, so if you have any questions about this integration, and if not, I'll move after that to the integration on the triangles. Et c'est compliqué le PDF parce que